McCarthyism refers to specifically to a concerted effort to uncover communist spies within the State Department. More broadly, it refers to this effort to limit and restrain and contain the communist threat or the influence that communists might be able to have within American culture, society, and politics, okay? McCarthyism is named after Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin, who in 1950 stands up and pulls out a document from his briefcase and says he's got a list of 250 names of people within the State Department who are communist spies, or as he likes to say, a collection of left-wing bleeding hearts, egg-sucking liberals, communists and queers, okay? Look, the homosexuals were always associated with the communists because, like, they're both, like, the subversive underlying threat to everyone. And also, people thought the homosexuals could be bribed by the communists very easily. Anyway, they're associating the two together. Anyway, McCarthy's up there railing against them, and he later has to revise the number to 57 names. It was like, no, actually it was 57 names. And he's like, later on, he's like, actually it was 81 names, okay? He's all over the place. He's improvising. He makes it up as he goes along. And every day he's standing up in the Senate, and he's railing against this, like, pervasive Soviet threat within the State Department. We got to get in there. We got to pull them out. You know, thanks to FDR and Truman, we got all these communists in there. Get them out. We got to have all the documents. Give us all the documents. It's like that, whatever, that Mueller probe that went on for 17 years. It's like that, but it's like McCarthy looking for communists within the bureaucracies of the federal government, okay? It actually McCarthyism starts in the aftermath of two very prominent convictions for Soviet spying or potential Soviet spying. The first one was Alger Hiss, who had been a prominent member of FDR's administration since the 1930s, and then Truman in his administration as well, okay? He was kind of a mid-level government bureaucrat, not a big deal, kind of like your ordinary guy, you wouldn't suspect. All right, his name is Alger, right? His last name is Hiss, so he might have been evil. No, I don't know, but look, he's fine. But look, anyways, he's a mid-level Democrat and accused of spying for the Soviets. And he's accused by this very famous guy, Whittaker Chambers, who converts from communism to Christianity. And this guy has a lot of gravitas in the public eye. And so his accusation carries a lot of weight. We've never actually, I don't think it's been resolved, whether Hiss was actually guilty or not. It's not clear. But what it did was it lent a lot of weight to accusations that Republicans had already been lodging against Democrats, that there was the taint of communism within the FDR administration, within the Truman administration, okay? And it also, like, is frightening, right? Because this guy's been involved at all levels, at kind of the mid-level of government for a long time. So he knows a lot of things about the United States government. He could be very useful to the Soviets. Now, along with this other guy, Klaus Fuchs. Klaus Fuchs. He's a German scientist, okay? He'd been involved in the Manhattan Project, right? And he is convicted of having a spy ring, a Soviet spy ring. And he's German-born, but he's of English nationality. So he gets extradited to England where he's put in prison for 5 years, okay? These two convictions kind of mark the beginning of the Red Scare. And, a few weeks later, McCarthy gets up and pulls out his 250 names out of his briefcase, and it doesn't go away for 4 years. Every day he's up there condemning communism, railing against it, saying it's a pervasive threat. Now, for some people, so basically what happens is the FBI is heavily involved in investigating all sorts of people for potentially having had ties to communism in the past. Maybe they belonged to the Communist Party at one point. Maybe they married someone who did. Maybe they spoke to someone in the grocery store once who was a communist. It doesn't matter. Anyway, if you had some kind of tie to someone who might have been at some point in their life thinking about joining a communist party, okay, then you could be a spy. So the FBI is looking and they're investigating, right? And McCarthy is pushing for further investigations, okay? And of course there are some people who are involved, but not very. So anyway, for some people it's deadly. This whole atmosphere of fear that starts to develop is deadly. So this couple, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, they were connected to Klaus Fuchs, okay? And so they get convicted of spying. And the judge says, what you have done is worse than murder, and he sentences them to death. Okay, now critics of the conviction say, look, it's not clear, like there was some tainting of the evidence or something, there was some corruption that happened. But other critics say the fact that they're put to death is too extreme, like Fuchs himself was simply extradited and put in jail for 5 years. But the Rosenbergs have been given the death penalty. But Eisenhower's up here, and Eisenhower he can't look soft on communism. So he does not commute this sentence, and they are electrocuted in 1953. Robert Oppenheimer, another famous victim of the Red Scare in the 1950s. Robert Oppenheimer, of course, had led the atomic bomb project, the Manhattan Project, out in Los Alamos, New Mexico. Okay, he was in charge of the laboratory out there in the 40s. And his wife was a communist, and he knew some like leftists. They would come to his house for dinner, like, you know. So he is then, and his house had been wiretapped for like 14 years. So none of this was new information, okay? But it's like, boom, okay, now we're afraid of it. And Oppenheimer is out. He's not put in jail, but he's like, he's shut out from any role of consulting the federal government, of being involved in foreign policy at all, or research on the behalf of the government. He had very, the highest levels of security clearance, and then boom, nothing, wiped out. And, his friends, some of these other scientists are saying it's not because they found new information. They knew about everything before, but it's because he had opposed the hydrogen bomb. That's why he's now being punished. Anyway, he's another kind of high-profile victim of the Red Scare. But McCarthy is still every day he's getting up, he's condemning the liberals and the communists, and he's railing about the pervasive threat of communism. Now, Eisenhower doesn't like McCarthy. McCarthy is this kind of like brutish, like bullying guy, not appealing to Eisenhower, right? But Eisenhower doesn't ever condemn him or put a stop to what he's doing because he agrees with his goals and principle, like limiting, constraining, getting rid of communism, right? He doesn't like his methods, right? But also, what's he gonna do? Like condemn McCarthy and then open himself up to being called soft on communists, or creating unnecessary division within the Republican Party? Like, what's he going to do? So he doesn't really do anything to stop McCarthy, but McCarthy kind of like shoots himself in the foot, okay? And his career starts to unravel in 1953, and it starts with this series of news programs about him by this investigative journalist named Edward R. Murrow, who'd risen to fame by covering the London Blitz. And he has this series of television programs about McCarthy called See It Now, and mostly he just like lets McCarthy get on TV and say ridiculous things and like undermine himself, okay? And that's kind of a turning point, even though it's not really clear how many Americans actually watched the show, because they were actually much more interested in watching Dragnet, because, I mean, who wouldn't be, actually? But then what happens is McCarthy, he's now more questionable in the public mind because of these Edward R. Murrow investigations, and then he attacks the United States Army, and he's demanding access to information in the Army to like identify subversive activities there and get rid of it. And the Army is not going to let this go on, and they come back and accuse McCarthy of corruption, okay, saying that he has given privileges to certain political allies, and to help him in his, investigations or whatever. And of course, Eisenhower doesn't like this because Eisenhower's an army guy, right? So McCarthy then he's accused of corruption, and he's also lodging accusations at the army. So the Congress comes in and decides they're going to investigate. So the Senate begins an investigation in April of 1954, which is going to go on to June. And they air the proceedings live on television, okay? And during the day, there really wasn't anything else to watch. So there were a lot of people watching these proceedings, okay? By this time, you had televisions in like 25 million homes. And they are estimating that like 20 million people watched the proceedings. If you remember, most of the women are not at work. The housewives are at home, okay? And so they're going to maybe turn on the TV in the middle of the day and look and see what's going on with McCarthy, right? So there were a lot of people watching it. And McCarthy's on the defensive here, right? Like he's a drinker, and he starts descending into drinking very, very heavily during these proceedings, and it shows when he comes into the hearings. Like he's unkempt, he's disheveled, he's kind of like not presenting himself in a clear way, right? He's kind of yelling. He's not like anyone you know ever. Okay, but he is. Look, I'm not a drink, but look, his interjections. They look like he's crazy, like he's erratic, and they're causing people to burst out in laughter who are in the room. Okay, and he's looking more and more ridiculous. He's really undermining himself, and then he's like. He's going after Eisenhower, saying, Eisenhower, we need all the files. We need all the files to root out all the egg-sucking liberals in your administration who are hiding there under the surface. Like, we need the file. And Eisenhower comes out and he says, look, I'm not going to give you any files. Forget it. Like, the public is not privy to the information that you are demanding. It's not in the public's interest that I release to you information about people in my administration, okay? And he says, the Congress, therefore, doesn't have any right to this information. He says no, and that kind of closes the issue, right? And then there's this event on June 9th it is, and McCarthy really is going off on this lawyer who is like, he's accusing of harboring leftists in his law firm, and the lawyer replies with this very kind of like firm but calm and resolute like response that shuts McCarthy down, and it like the people in the room like burst out cheering for this lawyer who has shut down McCarthy. And after that, McCarthy's like a beaten guy. Like he's clearly like now like a political like outsider. And Eisenhower can like completely do what he wanted to do all along, which is disassociate himself from McCarthy. So he bans him from coming to the White House social gatherings. When Nixon is up in Wisconsin, campaigning or giving a speech or something, McCarthy comes and sits next to him, and then an aide comes up and says, can you move? Like, Nixon doesn't want to be seen next to you. And then they find McCarthy later in a corner, like weeping by himself. It's like a complete and total decline. And he drinks more and more. And then in 1957, he dies of liver complications. Okay, so it's a really inglorious and devastating end to this McCarthy guy's career and life.